The chosen ones are welcome. The witches feel that their coven's togetherness is invincible, a force of unshakable oneness. But what happens when that oneness is confronted with a force so strong that their rituals fail and their spells become silent? This isn't a narrative about huge wars or armies. It is the story of how one person, a one-man army, took down a whole gang of witches without the use of magic, but rather by pure will and purpose. The chosen one did not battle for fame, power, or vengeance. They battled because it was essential. The witches misjudged the strength of a single goal that was unaffected by fear or temptation. A lost youngster has to be rescued, and that's all that mattered. The witches felt that their combined power made them untouchable, but the selected one was immovable, with unflinching concentration. They destroyed the witch's illusion, exposing their vulnerability. The actual power was not in spells or numbers. It was the power of a single resolute heart battling for what was right, rather than for themselves. And with that, they rescued the missing kid, thereby ending the witch's rule. Let's face it, they were rocked by more than just their defeat. It was how you tore through their illusions, exposed their flaws, and left them untouched. Imagine a room full of witches talking about you, not about the bad forces. Because this isn't your standard chosen one story. Fasten your seatbelt. This is the narrative of how, despite everything, you destroyed their terrible world and why they're still afraid to say your name aloud. A chosen one works differently from the broader population. The chosen one enters the chaos with a single unshakable aim, while the others rely on backup plans and group tactics. It is clarity, not arrogance. An understanding that true power can only be found in focused purpose, while others panic, overthink, or second-guess why you dismantled them. Witches thrived in times of unrest, feeding off their victims' uncertainties. They were successful in creating confusion, conflict, and distraction, but none of it worked against you. They were supposed to be reinforced by their group. They anticipated that their closeness and rituals would overwhelm or intimidate. They did not realize, however, that a rowdy group is little more than noise. They were less concentrated than you were. You remained calm despite their efforts to induce fear with reciting symbols and other theatrical effects. Their difficulty was their enormous quantity. Their reciprocal reliance on one another became a source of dependence. They were scattered, bewildered, and powerless until you struck them. They felt that battling an army needed an army. They underestimated the importance of one person's task. A single individual, free of uncertainty and fear tactics, is much more dangerous than any group of people linked by fragile relationships. You were not afraid, confused, or busy. You were correct, and, like a blade, its precision cut through them. Their instability eventually eased, not because you were more strong in the usual sense, but because your understanding revealed their vulnerability. You stood firm while they desperately sought to reassemble, and they realized they were lost in the stillness. Their supposed unity shattered like glass, leaving just one person and one aim. It required more than one struggle to overcome the witches. It was about dismantling a whole tradition. They weren't working alone. They held the load of terrible knowledge passed down through generations, like a perverted inheritance. Every ritual they conducted and every spell they cast was founded on the labor of their forefathers. They represented more than simply themselves. They represented a vast system of terror and control that had been developing unabated for decades, if not millennia. When you faced them, you had to deal with more than just their numbers and combined power. They thought they were invincible because of their history. Their belief that their pedigree made them invincible was what gave them strength, not their ability. You were more than just an opponent for them. You were a nuisance, a threat to the foundations of their lives, just as they had destroyed so many others before you. They believed they could wield the weight of their past to terrify you. However, the truth is that they left behind a house of cards. It was predicated on intimidation, secrecy, and the illusion of limitless power. You destroyed the power of their history by refusing to bow to it. You destroyed all their forefathers had constructed by sending shockwaves into the past, rather than just destroying them in the present. The fact that you did not play their game made it much more difficult for them to oppose you. You did not utilize archaic scriptures or counterspells. You fought with your pure, unwavering determination, which they couldn't predict. That is the source of their terror. They witnessed everything they had been trained to believe crumble in front of their own eyes, not just lose a war. You represented the end of their tradition and lineage. Fear is about the unknown, not just power. Because you were strong in the way that the witches defined power. They weren't terrified of you. They could not figure you out. This is why they scared you. They had spent their life to studying dark arts, symbols, and rituals designed to affect and predict the conduct of others. However, you ignored their restrictions and their calculations. You were a blank space, an outlier. They were terrified by it. They expected you to react in ways they could control, such as dread, hesitation, or even thoughtless violence. This was their technique. Control was their lifeblood, and they lived on the emotions they instilled in their victims. They were taken away by your calm, unwavering manner as they looked at you. You were unaffected by their illusions. You avoided falling for their tricks. They couldn't have foreseen you, and the most lethal force in their cosmos is the unexpected. They became increasingly uncomfortable as they sought to test you. They did not get the intended effects from their spells. Their intimidation tactics failed. Their confidence was broken with each failed attempt to smash you. You exposed the limits of their power rather than just challenging them. You made them realize they weren't as unbeatable as they thought. What actually crushed them was the fact that you utilized their fear of the unknown against them, which was more potent than your own might. They'd been in command of the narrative for a while. They were now the ones stumbling about in the darkness. You become the very thing. They could not combat a power they did not understand or foresee. Instead of just beating them, master manipulators are witches. They take immense joy in uncovering and exploiting a person's underlying worries, phobias, and inadequacies. Their strength comes from their ability to persuade people of their own vulnerability, not from their spells. This is how they break their opponents. But when they looked at you, they couldn't see anything to take advantage of. It was not because you lacked shortcomings or fears. Rather, it was because you had already faced, conquered, and neutralized them. You weren't carrying any weapons or tools. Charms, symbols, and rituals were superfluous. You transformed became the weapon. The shift was internal rather than external, since there was nothing left to assault. They were unable to hurt you. Every attempt to infiltrate your soul or mind was met with resistance, driving them to seek an unreachable angel. It was difficult for them to plan for this. They were trained to battle those who depended on external factors like allies, equipment, or techniques that they could eliminate. However, it was too late when they realized you were your own power. They didn't see anybody carrying any tools. They recognized the epitome of unyielding commitment. The term one-person army refers to a shift in authority rather than a change in numbers. You were the weapon, not the one thrusting it at them. Their illusions were shattered with each stride you took toward them, and their fear grew with each failed attempt to control you. You destroyed their whole plan for attaining power, not just beat them. Neither methods nor tools were sufficient to defeat the witches. You defeated them. The witches believed that their greatest strength was their united power. They relied heavily on their rituals, their coven, and the belief that their unity made them invincible. They cast spells in tandem. They chanted simultaneously, giving the appearance that they were flawlessly synchronized. However, their supposed unity was a hindrance rather than a strength. It supplied them with a false sense of security while concealing their own weaknesses. When you stood up to them on your own, you exposed the illusion's flaws. They were confused how to proceed without the security of their numbers. They were unprepared for someone who could challenge them without their support, friends, or the barriers they thought made them invincible. Their rituals helped them sustain their fearlessness. However, you showed them what happens when that network of dependence is shattered. They had been ignoring the truth that their power was only effective when they had each other to depend on. But your presence forced them to confront it. Their cracks were visible when you refused to back down. Your defiance caused their union to dissolve. Their confidence faded one by one. Their joint power was never authentic. It helped to alleviate their own worry of being alone. The loneliness you made them feel was what made things worse for them. They had spent their whole lives exploiting the vulnerabilities of individuals who were alone by projecting loneliness and fear onto others. They were the first to feel it, however. Their rituals lost their meaning, and the bond upon which they depended became stale. You shattered their fundamental foundation. In addition to overcoming their gang, you exposed the underlying vulnerability of their united might by standing alone. The witches believed they had surpassed the concept of mortality. Their dark rites forbade information and magic. All have the same goal: to create the impression of immortality. They value permanence as much as power. They wanted to believe that they were unstoppable and that their impact would remain forever. However, destroying them did more than simply put an end to their reign. It also dissolved the fantasy on which they had depended. You did not win by using force or a brilliant strategy. The purpose was to reveal the truth behind their veneer. They had convinced themselves that their spells made them untouchable. However, they were not prepared for someone capable of removing those false security layers. Their defenses collapsed, leaving them spiritually and physically defenseless. They faced the horrible truth for the first time. They had fled their whole lives. They were mortal, like everyone else. This realization hit them more strongly than any physical assault. The idea that they were impervious to time and consequences had formed the basis of their identities. Your win demolished their worldview while also destroying their physical selves. Every ceremonial incantation and secret uttered in the shadows was shown to be futile against someone who was not afraid to challenge them. The loss of their illusion, more than the defeat in fight, was what really terrified them. They eventually came to terms with death. What they thought they had beaten was always waiting for them. Their power was limited, and their immortality was a fiction. Not only did your win destroy their rule, but it also forced them to confront the one fact they had always rejected. They were never invincible. The combat was decided well before the first move was made. Fear was the core of the witches' whole plot. They projected, enlarged, and exploited it as a means of control. Their main weapon was terror, which was more powerful than any spell. Most people believed in the power of their illusions, which is why it was effective. Fear, on the other hand, thrives only when the mind feels it is legitimate and associated with you. That is where they failed. Their demise was your steadfast persistence. They assaulted you with all they had. Illusions are expertly created to disrupt you. Shadows that create anxiety and whispering, to sow doubts. But you stood there without flinching. It was certainty, not arrogance. You deprived them of their most effective weapon by refusing to give their deceit any credence. The witches were at a loss on how to deal with you. They had spent their whole lives exploiting other people's flaws and prying on their hesitations. They had nothing left to fall back on when those efforts failed. All of a sudden, the psychological struggle they had been employing to win every battle became irrelevant. They were concerned that your immunity would disclose their own dependency on them, not only that you were immune to their tricks. They had no power because they lacked the terror to dominate. Furthermore, the longer you persisted, the less confident they were. They realized they'd already lost, but it was too late. This was a battle of wills rather than magic or raw force. Yours too was impenetrable. The combat was ended by the time they noticed it. They couldn't control you because you weren't driven by fear. You fully demolished their fighting plan before they could even deliver the first hit, rather than merely resisting them. The witches thrived off their arrogance and the belief that they were untouchable due to their mystery. They disguised themselves behind their numbers, evil abilities, and masterfully created fantasies of power. They had long believed that no one, much alone an individual, would dare to confront them. Your existence seemed ludicrous to them. They thought it was impossible for one person to go against their whole ancestry. However, it marked the beginning of their decline. They were fooled by their arrogance. They believed that their overpowering reputation would be enough to destroy you before the combat even began. So they devalued you. They regarded you as an irritation, not a threat. Their mistake was overconfidence, which you took advantage of. You did not follow their rules or confront them on their terms. They do the work for you because they believe they are better. Their efforts to depend on their mystique were usually unsuccessful. Instead of terrifying you with their symbols and rituals, they demonstrated how much they relied on theatrics. Their lack of individual ability was clear, but they expected their numbers to overwhelm you. They had based their power on the assumption that no one could threaten their unity. You destroyed that impression by refusing to be intimidated. For them, the irony was destroying their unity, reputation, and dark arts. They discovered that the attributes they believed made them unstoppable were really their flaws. You did not merely defeat them. You demolished all they stood for by leveraging their own resources and conceits. They lost everything due to a fatal error in their calculations. Not just a mistake. They fell because they were unable to perceive themselves, not because of what you contributed to the struggle. Witches were used to deploying their wicked powers, rituals, and incantations in warfare. They believed that their spells might affect anybody, that even the most resilient brains may be shattered by their low frequency. Intense. They failed to see that you were on an entirely different frequency, thus their rituals could not affect you. Your energy fields were responsible for winning the battle. Overwhelming may not be accomplished via power or brute force. Because your high-frequency resilience was too powerful for their low vibrations, whatever bad intent they projected bounced off you. They tried to fascinate and attract you into their manipulative, fear-based reality. But every attempt was thwarted by the force of your presence. They utilized their own energy to neutralize their power since they didn't know how to deal with someone who didn't just reject it. You had an inner strength that was much more potent than their charms, tricks, and rituals. You didn't have to fight back with physical force. Their dark tactics were useless in the face of your energy. The force of your presence was absorbed and dissipated. Every attempt they made to subdue and weaken you, you out-vibrated them rather than just outfitting them in the traditional sense. They were used to imposing their will on others and manipulating people's emotions to meet their needs. However, you were distinctive. They couldn't believe the strength you projected as you stood there unwavering. Your energy not only protected you, but also pushed them away. You were a live, breathing force barrier that was impervious to their low-frequency vibration. So you weren't only impervious to their power. Regardless of their lack of power, their rituals were eventually successful. Their energy was far lower than yours, which is why they failed. Witches were known for their corrupt activities, which included sowing doubt, offering false promises, and eventually changing people who opposed them into puppets. They were adept at influencing their adversary's mind. For the majority, the allure of power or the chance of survival would ultimately lead them to lose themselves. They encountered something they couldn't control as they approached you, an unshakable moral compass that stood as an impenetrable barrier. They attempted to seduce you with their power, promises of control, and offers of forbidden knowledge. They tried to persuade you to change your mind and question your decision, but they underestimated your character's strength since you weren't playing along. You exposed every trick they employed, including manipulative manipulation and tempting promises of grandeur. They were unable to counter your honesty as a weapon. They were unaware that someone who was not motivated by self-interest would be resistant to their usual unethical techniques. You already knew how precious you were. You didn't care about their strength or appearance. They were revealed when they attempted to undermine you by temptation. They were used to manipulating people and entangling them in their web. However, their webs were ineffective against you. They displayed their own fragility in their hasty attempts to corrupt you. Their ability to persuade others to abandon their own strength was what made them powerful. It's not their magic or mathematics. However, you did not follow their instructions. They were powerless and exposed by your tenacity in the face of their attempts. They exposed the flaws in their power in addition to failing to corrupt you. They were nothing until they could break you. You overcame them because it was necessary, not for publicity. The witches were used to fighting for honor, supremacy, or punishment. They were motivated by a desire to prove their dominance. desire for respect, or personal benefit. However, they quickly realized that their usual techniques would not work when they met you. You were not here to gain attention. You weren't competing because you wanted to add another trophy to your collection or get accolades. You were not defending yourself at all. You had to fight because you needed to, because it was vital to eliminate their wicked force from existence. And they were terrified by it. They could not understand how detached you were. Manipulation was the core of their whole strategy. They would tempt their foes with boasts of grandeur or use horror to draw their focus away from the bigger picture. You were unconcerned about personal riches, fame, or fear. No one's praise or approval was required for you. You were motionless because you acted out of pure need for them. Your degree of isolation made you quite unpredictable. There was no way to bargain with you or divert your attention with false promises or distractions. They were unable to manipulate your emotions or ego. You have no intentions of proving anything. Promises of wealth, status, or power did not sway you. You had a clear and unwavering concentration. They had to abandon their authority. This was a witch's nightmare. They have always been able to manipulate others by capitalizing on their fears or passions. You lacked both. They were unable to capitalize on the underlying strength of your commitment. Your achievement was not due to beating them only to win. It has to do with meeting an inescapable commitment. Their attempts to manipulate or divert you were thwarted by your unwavering determination. Your unadulterated purpose, as well as your strength, triumphed over them. Number 12. You made their true character known to them. The witches deliberately cultivated an image of invincibility to conceal their true nature, spending their entire lives weaving a web of secrecy and dread. They used deception to stay in power, convincing others and possibly themselves that their authority was unchallenged. However, by opposing them, you did more than just question their authority. You forced them to confront the reality of their own lives. Lying was the foundation of their power. You took away the masks they had painstakingly created by refusing to be coerced or intimidated. You did not need to use coercion or force to reveal them. Your presence was all that was needed. Your steadfast refusal to compromise whenever they attempted to influence your opinion or instill fear. You fought back, exposing the hollowness beneath their alleged strength with each instance of resistance. They could no longer avoid reality. Their illusionary power was designed to keep people terrified and subservient. It was not authentic. The secrecy, mysticism, and rituals were all a ruse to create the idea that they were invincible. You displayed it by resisting them. You pushed them to face their own fragility, which was the only thing they could escape. The fact that the self-disclosure occurred too late is much more hurtful to them. Only after they had lost did they realize who they really were. They saw the emptiness of their own existence as the illusion crumbled. Not only did your victory undercut their physical might, but it also shattered their whole self-image. In addition to losing the struggle, they lost their sense of self, identity, and the belief that they were untouchable, which they had fought so hard to maintain. 13th, their myths will be surpassed by your legacy. Over time, the witches evolved their mythology and transformed themselves into mythical beings of malevolent power. Their rites were considered sacred and untouchable, and their names were spoken in horror. They thrived on the assumption that their combined might was limitless. Inherited from generation to generation, the coven became stronger with each new member. They wanted to be seen as the pinnacle of wickedness, an unstoppable force. However, something much more important than their failure happened when you stood up to them alone. You really shattered that mythology. In one bold action, you unveiled the truth that had been hidden for so long. Not only did you physically beat them, but you also broke the plot that kept them interested. Your unflinching realism was the source of their myths. Those stories of unstoppable witches and demonic spirits that ruled without challenge. By resisting them, you proved that no power, no matter how ancient or centralized, is unchallengeable. Unlike them, your legacy will endure. The witches' names will not be dreaded by subsequent generations. They will remember how one person exposed the deception of collective evil and toppled the seemingly unstoppable. A story of resistance that will be told and retold. You become a symbol, a reminder that true strength rests in having the courage to stand up for what is right, not in numbers or rituals, no matter how strong. No wicked power can destroy the legacy you've created. You will be remembered throughout history as the one who destroyed the witch's illusions, but they will be forgotten. You not only overcame them, but you also demonstrated that the tales they made up about themselves were false, and that one person with unflinching resolve could change the course of history. Finally, your victory included more than just slaying a bunch of witches. It entailed demolishing all they stood for. You forced them to confront their own fragility, shattered their illusions, and exposed their shortcomings. You stood firmly for yourself, not for recognition or glory, but because it was necessary. You battled with more than just strength and cunning. You possessed a strong moral compass that no evil power could shake. And you fought with purpose in that one moment. You were a living illustration of how power is not defined by numbers, spells, or fear. And you were confronted with the collective horror they had produced. It is decided by the individual's strength and integrity. This confrontation will make a lasting impression on you. If you stay loyal to yourself, your reputation as the one who exposed their deception will survive, and the myths they created will go away. Future generations will remember you as a force for truth rather than a conqueror. You will be a live illustration of the concept that no opponent is too powerful or the darkness too deep. The witches believed they would never die. They were mistaken. You have shown that actual power, which resides in the unwavering fortitude of one determined individual, is ageless. That is an undeniable achievement, a reality that will outlast any dark dream they have ever imagined. Please subscribe to the channel, press the like button, please share with your friends, and leave a remark below. If you enjoyed this amazing voyage and want to see more videos that challenge convention and explore the extraordinary, please share your ideas with us. The story does not end here, so stay tuned for more together. Let us continue to push the boundaries